I'm Gary Ryan, and I'm the director and the CEO of the Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art. And along with our board of directors, tonight I welcome you to this first look at our spring exhibitions. Kara Walker, Cut to the Quick, from the collections of Jordan D. Schnitzer and his Family Foundation. LaToya M. Hobbs, Flourish. The work of our Atrium artists in residence, Poetry Jackson, Amber Pierce, and Nad Harvin, and of course, our wonderful interactive art lab. The Virginia MOCA mission is to serve our community through the presentation of locally relevant and nationally resonant contemporary art that is exceptional in all of its timeliness, restlessness, and beauty. This is our North Star. And the exhibitions we open tonight demonstrate this, as did our presentations last spring of the work of Maya Lin and future exhibitions that will continue to do so. 2 years ago, we began our journey to tonight by saying yes to the offer to become one of 5 museums across the country to present Kara Walker, Cut to the Quick, from the collections of Jordan D. Schnitzer and his Family Foundation. An exhibition which asks us as viewers to look deeper and not look away from the U.S. history of slavery, which began in Virginia, just 30 miles from this museum. I want to thank Ciona Rouse, who co-curated the exhibition when it originated in Nashville at the Frist Museum, and here joined with Heather Hakimzadeh, our site curator, in realizing the original vision of the exhibition in the galleries of Virginia MOCA. Thank you, ladies. I also want to express our sincere gratitude to Jordan Schnitzer. Jordan has an unflagging commitment to support contemporary artists and to share their work with museums and communities such as ours. It is truly our privilege to participate in your vision. Thank you for your passion and your generous spirit. In addition to Jordan, I want to extend my appreciation to Vivian Montano and Steve Lawson, Susan and Andrew Cohen, the Rudder Family Foundation, Maria Hillebrandt and Martha Goodman, the Good Family Foundation, and Virginia Humanities for providing the financial means necessary to present these exhibitions. Thank you. As part of this journey, we enlisted the guidance of 2 advisory bodies, a programming advisory committee and a committee of community ambassadors. These volunteers shaped the programs that will surround the presentation of these exhibitions. If you could, would you please stand? Thank you for your assistance and expertise. Finally, arriving here has required the support and dedication of the Virginia MOCA staff. Thank you for your professionalism and the constancy of your commitment to our mission, our community, and to each other. As a non-collecting contemporary art museum, we are what we curate. And as is evidenced by these exhibitions, we have a treasure trove of talent. You are Virginia MOCA, and without you, none of this is possible. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Michelle Ellis Young and Lauren Francis, who will speak on behalf of the Programming Advisory Committee, formed for Kara Walker, Cut to the Quick, from the collections of Jordan D. Schnitzer and his Family Foundation. Michelle Ellis Young is the Chief Executive Officer of the YWCA of South Hampton Roads, and Lauren Francis is an Associate Producer of With Good Reason, a radio program produced by Virginia Humanities.
Good afternoon, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Gary Ryan, Allison Byrne, and to Truly Matthews for all that you've done to make today possible. Yes, we are reporting to you live from another night in the afterlife of slavery.
Yes, clap, clap.
So, when we first began meeting as a committee in August, we were met with the question of, first, who do we want to come see this exhibition? And we all kind of went deep into a reflective mode. It got a little quiet. And then the question was, who do we know will come to see this show? And it was a little quiet. And then I said, middle-aged Black women. And we all nodded because we know that that's who shows up to shows like this. And the question that I asked was, why is that? You know, why is it that middle-aged Black women, and perhaps just all Black baby boomers, have this sort of sense of obligation to go to see shows that are about like the afterlife of slavery or Jim Crow or those sorts of things? And that opened up the intergenerational dialogue that really has colored our programming committee meetings, and that I think you'll see throughout the show.
Good evening. The other piece I think that was important in our program committee discussions and our meetings was really to embrace community and ensure that community was actively engaged in the work that was being done through the hands of Virginia MOCA, but for the benefit of our people here in Hampton Roads. And so we started thinking about not just who would show up, but who would actively participate, commit, and engage in the work, the necessary work that must be done right here in Hampton Roads to bring attention to the work of one such as Kara Walker. And so what started off as just some really discovery types of questions really formed into some dynamic collaborations that are bringing a cross-section of individuals, such as other artists. It's bringing together that intergenerational aspect to make sure that we don't miss anyone and everyone feels like there's a space of belongingness in this work, and to make sure that we are tapping into all of the wealth of organizations that are right here in Hampton Roads. So as we go through this experience of this exhibit, that for some will be heart-wrenching, and for some it will be informational, and for some it will be eye-opening. Whatever your journey is in this work, in this exhibition, we're glad you're here. We want you to have a place to rest in it, and so that respite piece of the exhibit becomes critically important for not just those that have trauma experiences through this work, but those that are seeking to understand this work as well and find their place in it. So we're excited. Are you excited,
Very
Lauren?
excited.
Yes, we are
excited.
excited about this work that has come to our community for the benefit of our people. And because you are here, you are now adopted into the family of storytellers that can cascade this message right here in Hampton Roads without guilt, without shame, and with gratitude, even though it was painful. But we all have a unique opportunity to change the conversations. So we thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much.
So we are clearly in very good hands. Thank you, Michelle and Lauren, and thank you to all of those who partnered with you in the programming committee and on the ambassadorial committee. And now it's my distinct honor to introduce Jordan Schnitzer, one of the foremost collectors of works on paper in the United States. Jordan began his lifelong avocation as a collector at the tender age of 14, when he bought his first work of art from his mother's gallery in Portland, Oregon. Starting in the late 1980s, he began collecting prints and multiples of post-World War II contemporary artists. His collection is now in excess of 21,000 pieces, works, and includes many of today's most important contemporary artists. He and his family foundation generously lend work from the collections to institutions across the country and have organized more than 160 exhibitions at over 120 museums, of which Virginia MOCA is now one. Jordan is also president of Schnitzer Properties, a privately owned real estate company based in Portland, Oregon. We are so pleased to welcome Jordan here to Virginia MOCA. So without further ado, let me introduce to you to Mr. Jordan Schnitzer.
Good evening. I think after Lauren Michelle spoke, I'm not sure there are any more comments needed. I can't tell you how much I appreciate what you said, the tone, and the brilliance of Gary and the others to bring in outside folks to create support. And I'll come back to that in a second. So as was said, I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I grew up there and lived there. And when I went to first grade, my mother, my being an only child, had some time on her hands, and she enrolled in the Portland Art Museum Art School that now is called Pacific Northwest College of Art, that operates in the Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Center and the Jordan Schnitzer Dean. Anyway, so that opened that door to me, and the message there really is that all of us here had someone that helped us get into the art world, and it's our responsibility and I think obligation to help others, young people, neighbors, friends, to have the same experiences we're all blessed to have. So 3 years after going to art school, the main teachers in town, the art teachers, complained there was no contemporary art gallery in Portland. So she opened the Fountain Gallery of Art with her mother, my grandmother, Helen Director. So that began that 25-year journey. I had a working mother, like many of you. She'd fly out of the house before my father that was starting a real estate business that I've run for decades, and it was a magical time. She turned the gallery over to an assistant, and it still continues. And I was on the board of the Portland Art Museum, and like you wonderful trustees here, I helped with all the responsibilities that all of you have to help make sure this institution serves the community. And there was an exhibition of prints and multiples of what I'll call the New York School. And I came up from a board meeting and saw those, and I thought, I want to stay committed to art of our region, because if we don't support local artists, and there's some here I met a few minutes ago, they won't be able to stay. And that includes dance, music, theater, in addition to visual arts. So I went down to a gallery and I bought a few prints and a few more and a few more and a few more. I attended the University of Oregon, where Andy Schultz, who's right here, taught for 12 years. Now he's at the University of Arizona. And the director then asked if he could do an exhibition of my prints. He did. I went down, and I was so enthralled seeing the work up, most of which had been in storage. You may say, what do you mean in storage? Well, I had a mother who was a gallerist, and I was there a million times when someone came and said, gee, Arlene, I'd like this work by Louis Bunce, but I don't have any wall space. And what she said, and applies to all of us, if some piece of art speaks to you, don't pass it up just because your walls are already full. Rotate it, put it under your bed, but don't pass it up. So I'd blown out of wall space before I was out of college, and I had a storage room, and it was so wonderful to see the work up on the bigger walls like the wonderful museum here. But what really turned me on is when people came in and do all the things that you soon will be doing in that exhibition. Frown, moan, smile, grin, and especially when kids came in with their parents. And I thought, wow, I was lucky my mother opened that art door, but maybe there are a lot of kids out there, university kids, others, that still think that places like this are for some elitist few and not for all of us. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice to create a significant private collection of prints and multiples, never imagining it would grow like it has, and serve university and regional art museums. So we've now had 160, 170 exhibitions. We had 20 last year. We have 18 this year. We're lucky we do all those for free. I work pretty hard in the day job, and it gives me such sheer joy. And the only problem I have is when people introduce me and you were short, which was nice. I'm the one that's indebted to all of you for loaning the museum to our foundation so we could get the work out. Because when it sits in the warehouse, it doesn't serve the artist or the audience. And our passion is all about the art and the audience. So it's exciting to come here. Now, why post-World War II artists? Because they're artists of our time. Some are a little older than me, some a little younger than me here, but they speak of things that face us in society. I've suggested before that artists are always chroniclers of our time, no different than those editorial writers in the New York Times. Their job is to force us to deal with issues of society. Now, some artists just do lovely things that are beautiful, that take us on a magical journey of flowers or scenes or ocean, whatever. But most artists do work that has some burning message. Now, if you think about artists for a second, all of you in here took art when you were in grade school, high school. Some of you still do lots of art, okay? Mine's limited to, with my 5- and 7-year-old, to use crayons. Well, anyway, you won't. For artists to be in these walls, a couple things have to happen. They've got to have a burning message inside them, and they've got to somehow have the guts to put that work, whether it's sculpture, paintings, prints, whatever it is, in a public place where people like all of you can gawk and moan and groan and criticize and do whatever. And second of all, they've got to do it in a different way. If this were work that looked like Van Gogh, I guess that might be an interesting exhibition of Van Gogh knockoffs, but we've had a Van Gogh. Kara Walker has her own brand, and so does LaToya in the work she has there. So the artists post-World War II, artists of our time, okay, themes of our time, and I've always felt it important for me and all of us to have those artistic voices speak to us about our values, individually, community-wise, society-wise. Now, why Kara Walker? While I have 11 people that work full-time in our art program, I don't have a curator, someone tells me what to buy. I have enough obsession of what to buy. I saw Kara Walker's work in 1994, and what I've suggested before is that too many people, especially when they see abstract art, they'll say, what's going on there? Why can't that person just do some things we can, like bowls of fruit and beach scenes? And I'll say, well, all these artists that went to art school did plenty of bowls of fruit and plenty of portraits, okay? And while Kara Walker's work is a combination of things that are representative and abstract, she's put together a magical way of making her work come alive with the themes that you'll soon see. So I saw Kara Walker's work in 1994. I instantly liked it and bought it and started buying more of it, not knowing that she'd end up becoming one of, if not the most important, Black artists in the country today. As I bought more of her work and more of her work, we've ended up buying all of her prints and multiples and all of her figurines and so forth, and continued to add to the collection. So the first time this work of this exhibition was shown was about 12 years ago. We worked with the Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento. She grew up in Stockton until she was 13, when her father left to go to Atlanta and teach at Georgia State. She'll talk, and maybe the speakers will talk about the fact that the first time she really felt some prejudice was when she got to Atlanta. And so we had the opening of the first exhibition 12 years ago at the Crocker Art Museum. It then went to the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art at the University of Oregon. I have funded 3 university museums. And then it went to Boise. And then it went to Laramie, Wyoming, Springfield, Missouri, pretty white places. Then it went to the David Driscoll Center for African American Art at the University of Maryland. Then it went to UMass Amherst. I purposely had to go to places where they would not see that kind of work. She'd already had a major retrospective at the San Francisco Modern Museum, the Tate, MoMA, big places. I wanted her work to go to places like this, where it would shake audiences up. We funded symposiums, way before Black Lives Matter, we focused on those kinds of themes about why we in society haven't dealt with the racial inequality and acceptance of each other and man and women's inhumanity to each other. All these themes that she just forces us to deal with. Then we let it rest for about 4 or 5 years, and then it started at the Frisk Museum, and then it went to the Cincinnati Museum, and then it came here, and it goes to one more place. Now, why Kara Walker? What grabbed me about it? I like work that either is beautiful colors or that just take my breath away in terms of the coloring and the shape and form and whatever, or art that grabs me. And that's what this work does. Now, when she came out with her first work, she was widely condemned by everybody, especially people in the African American Black community. And I want to read one thing that really sums things up. Before I got here 2 days ago, I flew to Reno first, and we had an exhibition of Ellsworth Kelly. I had published his catalog, Raisonné, and I have all of his work. And there's a interesting thing about Ellsworth Kelly. He was part in World War II of a group called Ghost Army. And this was a group of 1,000 soldiers, artists that made a lot of fake planes and artillery thing to fool the Nazis that there was more troops, and they'd bring big sound systems by the front lines to make the Nazis think that there were big battalions there when there weren't. And the Reno, Nevada Museum of Art had an exhibition of Ghost Army things and borrowed Ellsworth Kelly paintings because he was one of those men in the Army and it affected him. I then flew to Roanoke, Virginia, up the street from you in Virginia here. We had a show of 20 women artists that was originally in Washington, D.C., and then we were lucky to come down here. And there are 2 of those Kara Walker prints in that women's show too. But Kara Walker, again, in the early time, the reason why I mention this is in the 20 Women Artists show, there's an artist named Betty Saar. And Betty is 94.5 in L.A., immense respect for her. Black artist that went through lots of ceilings, unbelievably difficult times. 2 daughters, Allison and Leslie. Allison is a major artist. I have lots of her work, prints, sculptures, bronze, whatever. I have lots of respect for Betty. But Betty was a real critic of Kara Walker when she came out. And let me read you this for a second. So here's someone I respect a lot, but this was the view when Kara's work came first out. I have nothing against Kara except I think she is young and foolish. How do young persons just a few years out of school get a show at a major museum? The whole arts establishment picked their work up and put it in the head of the class. This is the danger, not the artists themselves. This is like closet racism. It relieves them of all responsibility to show other artists. Here we are at the end of the millennium, seeing work that is very sexist. Now, that was her reaction, and I think I respect her a lot, but she was wrong. What Kara Walker did, based on her experience in Atlanta and then at RISD, is she just put work out. She didn't sit there thinking this would be popular, accepted, whatever. She reached into her guts and put this stuff out. Those silhouettes, my God, you can't have a simpler form of art. An art form that we all looked at in the pictures of the Westerns in the 18th, 19th century. They'd have on either side of the fireplace a nice, pretty silhouette. And she used that simple art form with these amazing heart images. And I like that. It was critical and important for her to do that, to shake us up. Now, since that time she's done that work, a lot has happened. Okay, enough? Never. But she soon became very accepted. I think what Betty Saar was talking about is here she worked in the trenches for all those years. She didn't have exhibits. Here this young gal comes along and suddenly is picked up and made a big celebrity. Now you can talk about what's fair, right, whatever, in the whole art world about who's shown and who isn't, bigger topic. But Kara Walker came up with her own brand and went top of the heap and hit us all with images that were difficult. What's interesting is when you meet her, she talks so softly, you can barely hear her. And yet out of her comes this rage of this work. So you'll hear more, and we'll get a wonderful lecture about her work. Just seeing it again, I just feel so honored that you wanted to show the work. And while I appreciate your thanking me that I loaned you the work, truly, I, on behalf of the 11 people who work full-time in our program, we're indebted to you, the board, all of you here, for having hosted the work. And most importantly, what I beg directors to do when they have these exhibitions is involve the community. I've said too many eyes don't wear out the art. The only shame is if every single person in your communities here don't see this show, that's the shame. Okay? And the fact that you did a brilliant job bringing advisory boards in and your programming is spectacular. I'm just so proud of all of you and excited that thousands and thousands of people will get in that room and let this amazing, brilliant young lady speak to them. Thank you.
I just want to take one more moment to thank Jordan. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next, speaker, Kara Walker's Cut to the Quick co-curators Heather Hakimzadeh and Ciona Rouse. Heather Hakimzadeh is the Senior Curator and Special Projects Manager at Virginia MOCA. Throughout her tenure at Virginia MOCA, Heather has organized over 75 exhibitions featuring local, regional, and internationally recognized artists. Her recent exhibitions include She Says, Women, Words, and Power, Inca Essenhigh, A Fine Line, and Wayne White, Monitorium. Ciona Rouse is a poet, editor, and educator based in Nashville, Tennessee. She is the author of the chapbook Vantablack, and her poetry has appeared in Oxford American, Wildness, The Account, Still, Talking River, and other publications. A visiting writer-in-residence at Vanderbilt University, Ciona teaches on the topic of medicine and literature, and she's also on the faculty of the Swanee Young Writers Conference. In addition to co-curating Kara Walker Cut to the Quick at the Frist Art Museum, Cincinnati Art Museum, and now here at Virginia MOCA, Ciona composed original poems inspired by Kara's work, and you will see these words on the gallery walls tonight. So please join me in welcoming Heather Hakimzadeh and Ciona Rouse to share a conversation.
You know, they wanted both of us to talk together since we curated this show for MOCA together, and we thought the best way would be seated with each other, so thank you. I'm actually going to act like an interviewer for a little bit because I know my process, but it's always fun to kind of peek behind the curtain a little bit and ask those questions about how these things kind of came about. And since this exhibition originated in Nashville at the Frist Museum, I'm kind of curious about how you kind of came into that fold and what the intention was when you first started having discussions about this exhibition.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here in Virginia and share the work here. But yes, it did originate in Nashville, Tennessee, with Susan Edwards, who was the director of the Frist Art Museum at the time. And she was working with the Jordan D. Schnitzer Foundation to bring this exhibition to Nashville, and decided that it was going to be really important to spend time with Kara Walker's work through the lens of poetry. And I had done a lot of work with the Frist in many different capacities, and I also agree with that. Just the way that Walker creates work is already poetic to me, and my practice in writing poetry is often spending time at art museums for hours at a time. Fortunately, I have a sister who will go to art museums with me for hours at a time and do that. But I am often responding to art with poetry. I do believe the best response to art is to create more art. And so it was already a part of my practice. It made sense to look at Walker's work through that lens. And so I got to come on and be a co-curator for Cut to the Quick.
Okay, so let's talk about that title.
Yeah.
How did you come about it, and what does it mean?
Right, so we were thinking about this name, Cut to the Quick. Obviously, Kara Walker is one of the greatest silhouettists, and so she's literally cutting paper, oftentimes in the space where these silhouettes are going to go up on the wall. She's there cutting the paper. So as a cut paper silhouettist, we wanted to play with that word, but then also, of course, the idiom cutting to the quick and getting quickly to the point, getting quickly to the nerve, getting quickly to the vital aspects of life, to the parts that bleed even, also really made sense for her work and what it's representing. And so that name has a lot going there. I believe that it's going to cut to the quick for a lot of us as we experience it here.
I think that was really true of me, and in fact, one of the more interesting aspects of curating collaboratively with you was I found that you pushed me to that painful part, and you didn't let me ever back off. If I ever started to be, well, you'd be like, no, why are we doing the show? And you're like, yes, Ciona. You're right, this is what we're going to do. So I want to thank you for that. I feel like my aperture has been opened broader, and I already thought it was pretty open, but I've learned so much. I've learned through Kara and through you, and I want to thank you for that. What has been your biggest learning opportunity as part of this exhibition?
Well, I mean, it's been wonderful to watch the exhibition as it's moved from Nashville to Cincinnati to Jacksonville and then here, and to see how it lives differently in each space, and to see how each space embraces community even more. And so that has been really special for me, especially here in Virginia, how the community has come together, our incredible team that has provided programming in addition to how the art lives on the wall. Everything is in conversation with each other, and it's been really powerful to do that. And then I think just working with you has been so wonderful because we have done that. We've gone through a lot of good things together, and I think that's a good model for how we can come together, push through, and make sure that the narratives that need to be told are being told and being told well, and that we're caring for each other along the way.
I agree. I think we really need this space for dialogue. I don't think I'm alone in this audience with thinking that we really need this space for dialogue in Virginia, and I'm very proud that Virginia MOCA is one of the institutions making that space. I was thinking that, you and I talked about it, we've had so many wonderful conversations. Ciona mistakenly gave me her cell phone number, which means she got random texts about thoughts, and vice versa.
I was going to say,
and vice versa.
Gone both ways.
We shared random texts when we had.
Wait a minute, have you thought of this?
Epiphanal moment. So we thought maybe we would talk through one of the Kara Walker's pieces and kind of share how our dialogue has gone. And I've been obsessed since I saw it on the checklist with Resurrection. I'm actually going to ask you first. Tell me your thoughts and feelings about this work.
This is one of my favorite pieces in the exhibition, and I know it's definitely Heather's as well. And so I'm glad that we get to talk through it. So whenever I'm spending time with a piece of art, and especially again, Walker's art, she even calls herself a painter-poet. I heard on a podcast recently with Helga Davis. And so I do approach it like I approach a poem. And my practice for approaching a poem is to first think about where I feel it in my body and experience it in my body. And I remember the first, we kept seeing everything on the computer screen, but the first time that this piece actually arrived into the Frisch Museum, I remember just feeling this energy behind my eyes, and I still feel it when I see this piece. And so I think let's start there. That is where I feel and experience this work in my body. I think it lends itself to that. In some ways, we almost get the shape of an eyeball, perhaps looking out. You'll get to see it in person and see it better, but there's wood around kind of framing this middle piece of the this altar piece that Walker created in 2017. And so there are pieces of nails even on the wood, but in some ways it almost looks like maybe an eye is looking out, perhaps through the bows of a slave ship, perhaps the wood creates an eye on its own. We get to see this woman's eyes awakening as she's being resurrected, perhaps. Walker's work has so many tensions, so I know we'll talk through that as we keep going through this. But yes, I feel it energetically in my eyes. There's so much to look at it, and it spreads wide. And so that's where I began first. Perhaps even some tears when I think about, this piece made me think a lot about Toni Morrison. A lot of Walker's work reminds me of Toni Morrison, and Beloved, she has so many wonderful passages and conversations about the Middle Passage, the Black Atlantic, and I kept thinking about all of these people who, there were so many Black people in the Middle Passage between coast as slaves were being forced to come over to the United States. And a lot of Black people recognized what was happening and what was going on, And instead of becoming a part of the commodity of this trade, they literally chose to jump off into the water, perhaps trying to get back home, but also perhaps out of just rebellion, knowing that they weren't going to be anyone's money. And so just the idea that a body could be resurrected, perhaps out of that water, stunned me the first time I saw it, and it still moves me in that way. What about you?
You know, I'm approaching this from a very Western white background. That's the one I was educated in. So of course I look at this and I think resurrection. I see 3 pieces. I think this is a Western European altarpiece I'm looking at. And so my thought first goes, this is sacred. I'm looking at something sacred. And what is it telling me? And, you know, middle passage occurred to me as well. Maybe not in the same way, you know. I felt it very much in my solar plexus. I felt like that there was something here that needed to be cherished and protected, but my brain can't shut off, and I keep thinking, what is Kara Walker's telling me something, what is she telling me? And so she's giving me clues through this white Western tradition of painting, and through this tradition of altarpieces. And altarpieces in Europe traditionally talk about the life of Jesus and pivotal moments in Jesus' life. And she called it resurrection, and I keep looking at it and I'm thinking, but that's not what she's showing. Like she's showing one thing and she's saying something else, so what does that mean? And so, can I go ahead and talk about the history? My first thought was, if I were going to compare this to the life of Jesus and those scenes that are normally portrayed, this doesn't look like a resurrection to me, unless you're talking about erecting something. It looked like to me like the elevation of the cross, the moment when Jesus is crucified. And so I was like, okay, so I think about crucifixion and resurrection and how these 2 words are kind of out there now, because you see this figure is being raised. And so, so then my brain then jumps. So what would Kara Walker want us to talk about if she were talking about crucifixion, resurrection? And I think that was the point when I kind of like contacted you.
Right. And I've always loved that Walker works in the tensions of those things, right? Is it being resurrected? Is it being simply erected? Is it being maybe even pushed back? Or is it being just simply held up? But for sure, we've got that conversation happening.
And I'm going to show one that I specifically brought up to Ciona when we had our discussion. This is Elevation of the Cross by Rubens. It's in Antwerp in Belgium. And you can kind of see a similarity there, like in kind of pyramidal shape, in this piece being raised. And so I kind of went back and forth, and I said, okay, so to the Black community, and I can't speak of this, but I can speak about things being raised and things being destroyed, and who gets to say, who has the say, who has the authority, at which points are there these places of power being pushed forward when you're erecting something, you know, when you're resurrecting something, what does that mean? And then my next thought is, maybe are we talking about Mother Africa? Are we talking about the African diaspora? And really celebrating these people and having that opportunity to now say, just to set your own monuments and to set your own statues. So this became very powerful for me, and I think this is just one interpretation. I don't think Kara Walker has a set interpretation. I think she's asking us to ask these questions.
Which is, again, what I love about her work, is that Walker's wrestled with questions, and then she furiously gets it on whatever, medium she's dealing with, and then she leaves us with all of the questions on the other side. So another thing, though, when I read a poem is I like to see the context in which the writer perhaps was writing it, a little bit about their background. And so one thing that we do know about this, it was created in 2017. The year before, she spent time at the Academy of Rome in a fellowship there. And so she was spending time looking at a ton of altarpieces We also know that she's used Rubens' work in other, referenced Rubens' work in other pieces. So I don't think we're far off in playing with that. And then, of course, she says with patrons, right? And so here we have her evaluating kind of Christianity, these altar pieces that have come up, and then the patrons. Who gets to be the patrons on the side of these altar pieces, as they so often have? The artist will render the patrons on the side, and here she's kind of flipping the script of who usually gets to be there. Often in those instances, you might see a Black servant in the background, maybe. But here we have Black figures in white prominently there. On this side, I feel like perhaps she's carrying a cross or
I think
touching a cross.
I definitely feel like there's references to that, and I think that wood reference is really interesting, because I also think, you mentioned earlier ships.
Right.
So I feel like, okay, is this a maritime reference, or is this
right.
a cross reference? And they're both there.
They
both exist.
And in 2016, actually, Walker also wrote an essay called The Assassination by Proxy, where she reflected on Black Lives Matter and Trayvon Martin and so many people who had been murdered by police, and was thinking a lot about Christianity's role in slavery, the current reality with Black Lives Matter. So even I think about, like, what is the resurrection story? These names that we keep repeating, these monuments that go up or monuments that come down.
And that's actually like the final image I wanted to present with this, is when I saw those ropes on that central figure, my other thought, I think both of our thoughts kind of went to this idea of monuments. So Carol Walker talks about working in the history, but being a very contemporary artist.
Yeah.
And so everything you see does reference history, but it also references the time it was made in and our current time. And I love that Resurrection really kind of takes this imagery, which we're seeing a lot now, thank goodness, and is now talking about what monuments we want to make and what monuments should be going up and which power structures still exist. So that was actually 15 minutes, believe it or not. It went by so quickly. But
we could talk about it for so long.
Forever and ever. Do you want to just give a final thought?
I will simply say, I hope that you dive into these narratives. I hope you come back again and again, just like we keep returning to these pieces. And thank you. Thanks for being here tonight.
Yep. And again, same thing. I wanted to point out that she and I don't always agree, which means Carol Walker does. There's no key sheet here. I think contemporary art can be a little scary sometimes, and people think there's an answer. She's a question asker, and she wants us to find our own answers. And I think you clearly are here to embrace that. So thank you.
Our next speaker is artist LaToya M. Hobbs, whose solo exhibition, Flourish, opens tonight in our main galleries. Originally from Little Rock, Arkansas, LaToya currently lives and works in Baltimore, Maryland. She holds a BA in painting from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock and a Master of Fine Arts in printmaking from Purdue University, and she is exhibited widely across the country and abroad. Her work is in prominent collections, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Harvard Art Museum, the Petrucci Family Foundation Collection of African American Art, the National Art Gallery of Namibia, the Getty Research Institute, and the Baltimore Museum of Art. The recipient of the 2020 Janet and Walter Sondheim Artscape Prize, among other achievements, LaToya is also a professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art and a founding member of Black Women of Print. Please join me in welcoming LaToya M. Hobbs.
Good evening. How is everyone? Good. Well, I just want to thank you all for being here this evening. I always think it's such an honor when people are willing to take out time of their busy schedules to hear me talk about my work. So again, I want to thank you for your presence this evening. I also want to extend a thank you to Heather and Allison for extending the invitation to exhibit in this wonderful space. I'm really excited to share my work with you. And then last, before I talk a little bit about my work, I want to thank my husband, Ariston Jax, and my two sons just for their support. It's been, a process. It's been a process getting prepared. So I won't be before you very long because I know you're all very excited to see the works on display, but I did just want to talk a little bit about my work. In my introduction, they mentioned I'm originally from Arkansas, currently living and working in Baltimore. In terms of my background, I do identify as a painter and printmaker. I got my start studying painting, but then toward the end of my undergraduate degree, I really fell in love with printmaking. And so the works that you're going to see in the gallery are kind of a marriage between both of those two practices. So you'll see a lot of kind of mixed media pieces, but I'm really interested in taking the things that I love most about my painting practice and the things that I love most about my printmaking practice and putting them together in this kind of seamless way. So I'm going to walk through a few pieces from the exhibition. The first piece on the screen here is titled Queen Anne. I think it's kind of, you'll see it is the first piece that you'll see when you walk into the gallery space. With a lot of my work, I've been dealing with themes of motherhood, also thinking about things of like generational, I want to say generational wealth, but generational legacy as well. So I think this piece is kind of exemplary of that. This is a portrait of my mother. Her name is Angela, but we call her Anne as her nickname. So I titled this piece Queen Anne. So it's not only an homage to her as my like physical birth mother, but this work also pays homage to my art mother. So if you look at the pieces in the background, I pay reference to Elizabeth Catlett, who is an amazing printmaker and sculptor, a really big influence on my art practice. She kind of sealed the deal for me in terms of wanting to study printmaking. When I encountered her work, I was like, I want to be able to do this. So really inspired by her work, the way she champions women and Black women in particular. Also, I pay reference to Samela Lewis, who has done so much to solidify the African American art canon. Paying homage to those two women, in addition to my mother. And then with this piece, you can see there's a lot of different processes. Again, I talked about being a painter and a printmaker and bringing those two things together. So there's carving, there's collage in this piece, there's some traditional painting. So just a lot of different things that people can kind of latch hold onto and enjoy. So the next work that I want to briefly mention is titled Jeanette's Daughters. And you can see from a lot of my pieces that I enjoy working on a really large scale. Part of that is because I feel like in a lot of our everyday lives, sometimes people kind of struggle with the idea of kind of being invisible, but I feel like when you come into the space and encounter these monumental works, the women in these pieces cannot be denied. They're larger than life and in your face. This piece also represents my desire to explore the traditional printmaking matrix as an art object. So with the type of printmaking that I do is called woodcut or relief. And so basically you have a matrix or a wood block. And so traditionally you would develop your imagery on the matrix. So I would do a drawing and carve it. And then the whole purpose of the block is simply to produce a set of images from. But I guess throughout my journey of being a printmaker, I've really become enamored with the block itself. So I really enjoy the idea of putting that at the forefront. So whereas a lot of people kind of just tuck their blocks away, it has no other purpose after the addition is made, I'm taking that and putting it at the forefront and claiming that as the art object itself. So I describe these as mixed media pieces or mixed media paintings. So they're, I usually start with a flat black surface of paint and then drawing and then a really intense amount of carving, as you can see from the image there. Okay, we can go to the next. All right, and this piece is Aaron and Anaya with hydrangeas. Something new that I've been recently adding to my work, in addition to accompanying the figure and pattern, which are, I think, two staple elements of my practice. You'll see a lot of plant life and foliage in the pieces in the gallery. And for me, that represents a couple of things. I think in my personal life, flowers are a form of self-care for me. And so I've been really kind of thinking about just small everyday ways that I can have these small moments of pleasure. And I think flowers represent that for me. And this also represents like the title of the show, which was given to me by my husband through one of our conversations talking about my work. But these, like the plants and the flowers, they represent this idea of growth. And also the idea of like flourishing and thriving in the spaces where we are. And that's something that I have personally experienced in my art practice in the past couple of years. It's also a desire that I have for the women in my community. So all of these works, you'll see some plant life, some flowers, but that kind of represents growth. It represents thriving. And it also kind of represents the season that we're kind of coming into the springtime. And we can go to the next image. And I think this is the last work that I'm going to show. This piece is titled Flourish after the exhibition. This is a portrait of Mahari, who is the director of Studio House in Baltimore, Maryland. Earlier this year, I was invited to be a guest artist at Studio House. And it was just such... It was a very informal experience, but it was just very warm and welcoming. And I was just really inspired by the space that Mahari curated. And also what she is doing, I think, is so vital and so important, bringing artists together, forming communities, and also just giving space and time for artists to work and to thrive and to grow with each other. So I wanted to do a piece inspired by my experience there. So this is actually in the living room space in Studio House. You can see Mahari there featured. And I also wanted to include, again, a lot of plant life. That was something that was very, that I really enjoyed about being their space. Like there's literally plants everywhere in the space. So I was really inspired by that as well. This piece also represents my desire to kind of expand my portraiture and thinking about narrative portraiture. So you're not only getting insight like to the physicality of the person, but I feel like documenting people in their spaces, you can get a better insight into who they are. And so I really wanted to kind of show this space authentically. All of these things were actually in the space, except for, I think, the painting that is on the right side. That's actually a dogwood. I decided to put that in the space because it's the state flower of Virginia. Mahari, the sitter, is also from Virginia. So, you know, giving these key elements that can give you insight into the person that I'm documenting in the work. And I think that's it. That's all that I have. But I'm really excited for you to see these pieces. If you have any questions about the work, feel free to come up and talk with me. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
All righty, it's almost time to get in there and see that work. So thank you so much, LaToya. Before we conclude our onstage program and move into the galleries and the atrium, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our 2023 Atrium Artists in Residence, Amber Pierce, Poetry Jackson, and Nad Harvin. A group exhibition featuring new work by these talented artists opens tonight in our community gallery, and throughout the run of the exhibition, Amber, Poetry, and Nad will have mobile studios in the atrium, allowing our visitors to engage firsthand with contemporary art. Amber, Poetry, and Nad, would you please stand for a moment? All right, and now we have a surprise. So I'd like to introduce to you Shark City Drum and Dance Corps, who is helping us to celebrate the evening and will be leading us into the galleries at the end of their performance. I invite you to stay seated during the performance, and as they move into the galleries, to follow them out and into the galleries. And after that, the galleries are open, and I look forward to seeing you in the atrium. So thank you so much.